What if the greatest lie ever told is not found in a book or spoken from a stage, but is instead told by the silence in our museums? A lie of omission about who, or rather, what, walked this earth before us. Imagine for a moment, the year is 1891. In a quiet field in Wisconsin, a team of archaeologists, funded by the Smithsonian Institution, carefully brushes away the last layers of soil from a discovery that will never be taught in schools. Before them lies a human skeleton of impossible proportions. Its estimated height in life was over 9 feet tall. They uncover a skull nearly 3 times the size of a modern man's, with a double row of teeth lining its powerful jaw. Newspapers of the era report on this incredible find, and for a fleeting moment, the world is confronted with the unbelievable. And then, as if swallowed by the earth for a second time, the skeleton vanishes. It is sent to the Smithsonian, and is never seen or heard from again. It is precisely these stories, whispers of a past we were told never existed, that we explore here. Welcome back to Mystery History for Sleep. I am Mr. H. For those of you who believe that history holds far more secrets than we are ever told, and for those who wish to join our quiet, late-night explorations into the unknown, I invite you now to subscribe to our channel and to gently press the notification bell. In doing so, you ensure you will never miss a journey into the shadows. Because the story we are about to uncover tonight is so vast, it does not merely challenge a chapter of history, it threatens to rewrite the entire book of our origins. The skeleton found in that Wisconsin field was not an isolated case, it was one of hundreds. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, reports of similar finds echoed across the American continent, from New York to California. Local newspapers, town records, and even letters from esteemed academics all told the same tale. The remains of a race of giants, unearthed from ancient burial mounds and forgotten caves. They were described with strange features, elongated skulls, 6 fingers, powerful frames that dwarfed ordinary men. These were not the stuff of folklore. They were, for a time, treated as archaeological fact, which leads us to the most unsettling question of all. A question that lies at the very heart of tonight's mystery. If hundreds of these skeletons were discovered, documented, and sent to our most prestigious institutions for study, where did all the bones go? To answer that question, we must first travel back to a time before the silence, a time when the earth itself seemed eager to speak of its long-lost children. We must sift through the brittle, yellowed pages of forgotten newspapers and dusty county records, for it is there, in the hurried ink of yesterday's journalists and the careful script of town historians, that the giants of America first came to light. This was not a singular event, but a chorus of discovery, a pattern of impossible finds emerging from coast to coast, all telling the same unbelievable story. Our journey begins in the heartland of ancient America, the Ohio Valley. Long before European settlers arrived, this land was home to a mysterious civilization known only as the Mound Builders. They left behind thousands of enigmatic earthworks, some shaped like great serpents, others like precise geometric forms, all constructed with an astronomical and mathematical knowledge that baffles researchers to this day. And it was from within these sacred mounds that the first and most profound evidence began to emerge. In the year 1829, near the town of Miamisburg, Ohio, workers digging into a large mound for gravel struck something unusual. It was a human skeleton, but one of staggering size. When fully excavated, it measured over 8 feet in length. It was buried in a seated position facing east, and was adorned with a copper headband and surrounded by finely crafted beads. The local community was stunned. Who was this kingly figure, so much larger than any known human? A report from 1800, in Ashtabula County, describes a burial ground containing the remains of what was termed a powerful and gigantic race. The account, chronicled in the historical writings of the Reverend Hubbard, speaks of men whose jawbones could be fitted over the face of a normal man with ease. This was not an anomaly. Time and again, as the mounds were opened, they revealed their giant occupants. Near Brush Creek, Ohio, Another mound yielded the skeletons of several individuals, all reportedly over 8 feet tall, possessing a strange abnormality that would become a recurring theme in these discoveries: a full, double row of teeth in both their upper and lower jaws. Imagine the sight: beings not just of immense stature, but with a biology subtly different from our own. They were human, yet something more. The accounts pour in from this region, a steady drumbeat of discovery. In Indiana, a skeleton 9 feet, 8 inches tall was unearthed from a mound in 1879. In West Virginia, a mound opened in 1883 revealed a 7-foot 6-inch skeleton surrounded by weapons and ornaments of copper, mica, and stone. The evidence was so plentiful that for a time it was widely accepted that a race of giants had been the original inhabitants of this land, the true architects of the Great Mounds. This wave of discovery was not confined to the Ohio Valley. It rippled outwards, as if the entire continent was a single vast burial ground. The state of New York, too, held its secrets. The public fascination with these ancient giants grew so intense that it even spawned one of the 19th century's most infamous hoaxes, the Cardiff Giant. Discovered in 1869, this 10-foot-tall petrified man was a sensation, drawing thousands of paying customers. It was, of course, later revealed to be a carved gypsum statue, a clever money-making scheme. Historians often point to the Cardiff Giant as proof that the whole phenomenon was nothing more than public hysteria. But perhaps this view is too simple. Perhaps the hoax was so successful precisely because it tapped into a truth that people were already uncovering all across the country. Did the ridicule surrounding the Cardiff hoax serve as a convenient way to dismiss the very real and far more inexplicable discoveries that were being made elsewhere? For real discoveries did continue. Near Cayuga Lake in New York, a burial mound was reported to contain the remains of men over 8 feet in height, their skulls described as having strange bony projections, almost like small horns. In Pennsylvania, a skeleton measuring over 7 feet was found with similar protrusions. These were not simple giants, but beings with features that pushed them even further from the known boundaries of humanity. They were a people of immense size and strange physiology, a people whose existence posed a direct challenge to the emerging scientific narrative of human origins, a narrative that had little room for American titans. But perhaps the most compelling story of all comes not from the east, with its grassy mounds, but from the arid, wind-swung west. It is a story that intertwines archaeology with the living memory of a people. For generations, the Paiute tribe of Nevada have passed down the oral history of the Site-Ka. Their legends describe a race of warlike, red-haired giants who were their ancient enemies. The Paiute say these giants practiced cannibalism, preying upon their ancestors until, after a long and brutal war, the last of the Site-Ka were cornered in a large cave. The Paiute tribes gathered and demanded the giants come out to fight. When they refused, the Paiute filled the entrance of the cave with brush and set it ablaze, suffocating and burning the last of their giant foes. For centuries, this was just a story, a local legend. Then, in 1911, a pair of miners began excavating that very cave known today as Lovelock Cave for bat guano to be used as fertilizer. As they dug, they began to find artifacts and bodies. A formal archaeological excavation took place in 1912, and later in 1924. What they found was astonishing and seemed to confirm the Paiute legend in every detail. They unearthed thousands of artifacts, including sandals over 15 inches long, tools too large for normal hands, and a handprint pressed into the cave wall that was twice the size of a modern man's. Most importantly, they found human remains, skeletons and skulls, many of which were described in field notes as being of unusually large size. And still attached to some of these skulls was something remarkable: strands of hair, distinctly red in color. Mainstream science has since offered explanations. They suggest the giant stature was an exaggeration, that the hair's color was the result of the cave's unique mineral environment, and that the skeletons were within the upper ranges of normal human height. Yet the Paiute elders tell a different story. They say the archaeologists found exactly what their ancestors had told them was there: the remains of the Sea-Takar, their red-haired giant enemies. They also say that many of the largest and most complete skeletons were taken away, never to be seen again. From the Ohio Valley to the caves of Nevada, from New York to the coast of California, the soil of America was telling a consistent story, a story of a lost race, a people of colossal size and mysterious origins who predated all known history on the continent. The reports were too numerous, too geographically diverse, and too similar in their details to be easily dismissed as isolated hoaxes or simple misinterpretations. A stunning picture was emerging from the ground beneath our feet, but as quickly as this picture came into focus, a shadow began to fall across it, a quiet, organized, and systematic effort to gather these remains, and to erase the astonishing story they told. An effort allegedly spearheaded by the one institution we had entrusted to preserve our history, not to bury it. The question hangs in the air, heavy and persistent: where did all the bones go? To find the answer, we must turn our gaze from the small towns and local newspapers and look toward the grand institutions of the nation's capital. For the story of the American giants is a tragedy in two acts. In the first, they were buried by the earth in some ancient, forgotten conflict. In the second, and perhaps more final act, they were buried once again, this time by the very hands we trusted to preserve our past. This is the story of a great and silent suppression, an intellectual culling where the evidence was not debated but simply disappeared. And at the center of this story stands one of America's most revered institutions, the Smithsonian. Founded in 1846 with a noble mandate for the increase and diffusion of knowledge, the Smithsonian Institution quickly became the official keeper of the American story. It was its job to collect the artifacts, catalog the discoveries, and weave them into a coherent narrative of who we are as a people and where we came from. But what happens when a discovery is made that does not fit the story? What does the keeper of the narrative do with a fact that threatens to unravel the entire tapestry? The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a time of tremendous intellectual upheaval. Darwin's theory of evolution was not just a scientific proposal. It was a revolution that was reshaping humanity's understanding of itself. The narrative being cemented was one of linear progress, from simple ape-like ancestors to the crowning achievement of Homo sapiens. It was a story of gradual, understandable change. A 9-foot-tall human skeleton with a double row of teeth, found in an ancient mound in Ohio, did not fit this story. It was a biological and historical anomaly. The existence of a fully formed race of giants in North America suggested a human history that was not linear, but complex, strange, and filled with branches on the evolutionary tree that science was not prepared to acknowledge. It resonated uncomfortably with the ancient, pre-scientific tales of beings like the Nephilim, the very myths that the new age of reason was determined to leave behind. Here, then, is the alleged motive. Researchers and theorists who have studied this phenomenon for decades suggest that the Smithsonian, in its role as the guardian of the new scientific orthodoxy, made a choice. It was a choice not to increase and diffuse all knowledge, but only the knowledge that fit the approved narrative. In this view, the institution took on the role of an editor, carefully curating the past and cutting out the chapters that were too problematic, too mysterious, or too big. The giants, they argue, had to be erased, not because they were not real, but precisely because they were. The method of this alleged erasure was as systematic as it was subtle, a quiet campaign that played out in small towns across the country, over and over again, following a chillingly consistent pattern. The pattern had 4 steps. Step 1 was the discovery. A local farmer, a team of miners, or a small-town doctor would unearth the remains. The local newspaper would report it with breathless excitement. The community would marvel at the size of the bones, tangible proof of the legends their grandparents had told. For a brief time, the town would be the center of a historical revelation. Step 2 was the arrival. Soon after the news spread, a well-dressed, educated man would arrive, often identifying himself as an agent or professor from the Smithsonian Institution. He would be professional, articulate, and immensely knowledgeable. He would praise the discoverers for their diligence and confirm the find's immense historical significance. Step 3 was the acquisition. The agent would explain that such a priceless artifact of a lost race needed to be studied and preserved by the nation's top experts in Washington. He would persuade, cajole, and if necessary, purchase the skeleton, often for a sum that seemed generous to the finder. He would make promises that the find would be honored, that it would be put on display in the National Museum for all the world to see, and that the town and its discoverers would receive full credit. With these assurances, the bones would be carefully packed into crates and loaded onto a train heading east. Step 4 was the silence, the final, deafening step. The town would wait. The discoverers would write letters, but the promised exhibition never happened. The letters sent to the Smithsonian would either go unanswered or receive a polite, bureaucratic reply. The shipment had been misplaced. The bones were still being analyzed. The specimen was of poor quality and had disintegrated during study, or, most commonly, they simply had no record of the acquisition. The skeleton and the agent who collected it would vanish from history, leaving behind only a fading newspaper clipping and the confused memories of a small town. This 4-step process is the common thread that runs through dozens of these stories. From a 7-foot skeleton found in a burial mound in Kansas to a 9-foot skeleton found near a river in Iowa, the tale is the same. Discovery, excitement, acquisition, and then silence. It was a slow, methodical erasure, a historical record being wiped clean, one giant at a time. For decades, this was just a collection of disparate stories, a fringe theory whispered among alternative historians. There was a motive and a clear pattern of behavior, but there was no definitive proof, no confession from within the institution. Until, that is, the story of a landmark legal battle emerged. The story that has electrified researchers in the alternative history community for years speaks of a final dramatic confrontation. According to these accounts, the American Institution of Alternative Archaeology, or AIAA, filed a lawsuit against the Smithsonian, alleging that the institution had engaged in the widespread destruction of historical evidence. The legal battle, the story goes, raged for years, quietly, away from the public eye, until it reached the United States Supreme Court. And here, the climax of this conspiracy narrative unfolds. In 2014, the story claims, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the AIAA, forcing the Smithsonian to declassify and release a trove of long-hidden documents. These papers, kept in secret archives for nearly a century, allegedly contained the shocking truth. They were said to detail the systematic destruction of tens of thousands of giant human skeletons. The documents reportedly quoted high-level Smithsonian curators from the early 1900s, who stated that the destruction was necessary to protect the established theories of human evolution and to maintain public confidence in the scientific narrative. It was the ultimate smoking gun, a purported confession from the institution itself, admitting to the greatest act of historical vandalism in American history. This incredible story of a Supreme Court showdown is the capstone of the entire conspiracy. It provides a motive, the protection of scientific dogma. It reveals a method, a systematic pattern of acquisition followed by silence and destruction, and it offers a confession, a secret archive of documents forced into the light by a court of law. With this, the picture seems complete. A lost history was not just misplaced, it was deliberately and systematically destroyed by the very people entrusted to protect it. It makes you wonder what other secrets the soil of other continents might hold. This American story feels like just one piece of a puzzle that spans the entire globe, connecting us all in a shared, forgotten past. As you're listening right now, perhaps with the moon high in the sky over North America, or as the sun begins to rise over Asia, I'd be fascinated to know. Feel free to leave a comment and tell me what city you're in and what time it is on your side of the world. It's a reminder that this mystery isn't just local, it's planetary. And to solve a planetary mystery, we must look beyond what was buried and turn to what was written. We must look to the ancient, forbidden texts that tell the story of where these giants truly came from, and why their memory had to be so thoroughly and so violently erased. To understand the giants, we must first understand the world that bore them. We must peel back the layers of our own noisy, complicated age, and listen for the echoes of a time before the Great Flood, a time barely glimpsed in the familiar pages of Genesis, but painted in vivid detail within forgotten texts like the Book of Giants. Forget the world you know. Forget its harsh seasons, its unforgiving landscapes, and its fleeting lifespans. We are going to a world that hangs in the mists of deep memory, a world that was, in many ways, a paradise on the verge of its own twilight. Picture a time when the very air hung thick with vitality, a world where the barriers between heaven and earth had not yet hardened into an impenetrable wall. This was the world before Noah, and it was a realm of astonishing abundance. The land flourished with a richness unknown to all later ages. Plants grew to sizes we would consider fantastical, and animals thrived in a perfect, untroubled harmony with their surroundings. The first humans lived in this flourishing landscape, not as its conquerors but as its gentle custodians. They built no cities at first, instead dwelling in the lush valleys and open plains of a world that had never known a natural disaster. The sky itself looked different then. Ancient texts speak of the waters above the firmament, a mysterious celestial ocean mentioned in Genesis that created a kind of canopy effect over the earth. This vapor shield filtered the harsh rays of the sun, creating a global greenhouse of perfect, stable temperatures. Some scholars believe this unique antediluvian atmosphere might explain the incredible longevity attributed to the first humans. In this world, lifespans did not span decades, but stretched across centuries. Time moved differently, slower, measured not by the anxious tick of a clock, but by the long, deep breaths of the earth itself. And humanity, in this long springtime, was different too. Adam and his early descendants walked the earth with knowledge from paradise still fresh in their minds. Their consciousness was not yet clouded by the static of civilization. It still echoed with divine whispers. They could, the old books tell us, name the stars and understand their movements. They could perceive the patterns in flowing water and even comprehend the language of birds. This was a time when the veil between the physical and the spiritual remained thin. Dreams were not just random firings of the mind. They could contain genuine messages from beyond, a direct line to a reality that we have since forgotten how to access. Theirs was a wisdom born of communion, not of conquest. They lived within the world's great symphony, not apart from it. Yet, for all its profound beauty, this world was not destined to remain peaceful for long. As human communities grew and spread across the fertile land, they began to drift from their original harmony. The change was slow at first, almost imperceptible. The descendants of Cain, it is written, built the first cities. They forged the first metals, and with them, they developed arts that were both beautiful and terribly dangerous. A new kind of knowledge began to enter the world, one based on extraction and invention rather than intuition and harmony. While the line of Seth tried to maintain the older ways, living close to nature and preserving the wisdom of the early days, the lure of this new power was strong. The first cracks in paradise were beginning to show, and from their high and holy posts in the heavens they watched. Celestial beings called the Watchers observed the unfolding drama of humanity. Their task was simple: to watch, to record, but never to interfere. They witnessed humanity laugh and fight and create and love. And something about these brief, passionate, fragile lives called to them. Something about the vibrant flame of mortal life, so different from their own timeless, unchanging existence, began to stir desires that were entirely foreign to their immortal nature. They saw the beauty of human women, and they grew restless at their posts. The perfect world did not know it yet, but it was holding its breath. The gaze of heaven had turned from one of protection to one of desire, and the fall was about to begin. It was a rebellion born not of hatred, but of fascination. Before the first sin was committed, before the first boundary was crossed, there was simply the long, unbroken gaze from heaven to earth. For eons, the beings known as the Watchers had performed their sacred duty. They were the Irin in Aramaic, the Grigori in Greek, celestial sentinels positioned among the stars to witness the growth of the young world below. Their mandate was absolute and clear: to watch, to record, to report back to the highest realms, and under no circumstances were they ever to intervene. They were the silent, perfect observers of the grand experiment of creation. But to watch is to see, and to see for long enough is to be changed by what you behold. From their timeless vantage point, they observed the brief, bright flame of mortal life. They saw humanity, in its infancy, experience a spectrum of emotions that was utterly foreign to their own perfect, placid existence. They watched humans love with a desperate passion, grieve with a heart-wrenching sorrow, create with a burst of chaotic inspiration, and live with the constant, thrilling pressure of an ending. And then, they saw the daughters of men. They saw their beauty, a wild, earthy, and vital beauty, so different from the serene splendor of the heavens. An obsession began to grow within them, a subtle poison in the waters of their immortal souls. A question, whispered at first from one celestial post to another, began to take form. What would it be like? What would it be like to feel, to choose, to make mistakes, to burn brightly, even if only for a moment? This forbidden thought smoldered for an age before a leader among them, an archon named Samyaza, finally gave it a voice. He gathered his fellows, 200 of the most powerful watchers, and spoke what they had all been thinking. Why should we remain apart? He asked. What if we descended and took for ourselves wives from among the daughters of men? The idea, once spoken aloud, became an irresistible fire. They knew the cost. To leave their posts was an unthinkable betrayal of a sacred duty, a rebellion second only to Lucifer's fall. Yet the pull of the world below had become too strong to deny. They gathered on the slopes of Mount Hermon, that ancient peak that straddles the borderlands of what would later be called Israel and Lebanon. It was a liminal place, a bridge between worlds, and it was here that they would make their final, fateful choice. They swore an oath, binding one another with terrible curses. They would all go down together, so that the crime would be shared equally. They would take human wives, and they would teach humanity the secrets of heaven. The ancient texts described their descent as a breathtaking, tragic spectacle, a shower of falling stars streaming down from the night sky, abandoning their appointed places in the cosmic order to take on physical form. They appeared on Earth as men of extraordinary height and impossible beauty, their eyes still reflecting the starlight of the home they had just forsaken. But marriage was only the beginning of their transgression. Their greater crime came next. They began to teach. The sacred trust they had held was to guard the mysteries of heaven. Now, they broke that trust, and knowledge meant to remain hidden until humanity was ready, was poured out upon an unprepared world. Each of the 200 watchers revealed the secrets of his station. The one named Azazel taught men the art of war, how to forge swords and shields, and he taught women the art of vanity, how to make bracelets and ornaments, and how to use cosmetics to beautify their eyelids. The watcher named Barakiel revealed the secrets of astrology and the signs of lightning. Kokabiel unveiled the mysteries of the constellations. Shamsiel opened the paths of the sun to human understanding, and Sariel taught the courses of the moon. Armoros taught the art of resolving enchantments and breaking spells. One by one, they unburdened themselves of heaven's wisdom. The effect on humanity was immediate and catastrophic. What should have taken thousands of years of natural development happened in a single generation. Villages transformed into fortified cities almost overnight. Men forged strange new weapons and fought with a terrifying efficiency. Humanity became drunk on these new abilities, turning them toward domination rather than harmony. This acceleration of knowledge, offered without the corresponding growth in wisdom, proved to be a virulent poison. The divine gift, given too soon and out of context, brought only chaos and corruption. Not content with merely teaching, the Watchers began their own terrible experiments, manipulating the natural world itself. The Book of Giants hints at the mixing of species, the creation of hybrid creatures, and the twisting of life into monstrous new forms that roamed the wilderness. further unraveling the fabric of creation. And as they committed these crimes, the Watchers discovered a terrible irony. They were changing. The celestial nature they had sacrificed was becoming clouded with the very human emotions they had once coveted: jealousy, fear, and a gnawing regret. Their powers, though still immense, began to wane. They found themselves trapped in a painful middle state, no longer fully divine, yet not truly mortal. But the most terrifying change was their newfound awareness of time. As immortal beings, they had never known the pressure of passing days, the weight of years, or the fear of an ending. Now, in their semi-mortal state, they could feel time's arrow piercing them too. This awareness brought a frantic quality to their actions, a desperate hunger to solidify their power on earth. They built great temples where they were worshipped as gods, demanded sacrifices, and established bloodlines to preserve their influence. They had their kingdoms, they had their wives, they had their power, but in quiet moments, as they looked up at the stars they had abandoned, they could feel the growing cold of divine displeasure. Their dreams, once filled with the music of the spheres, now echoed with the sound of approaching judgment. They had made their choice. They had broken their oath to heaven and sworn a new one to each other. Their fall, once begun, would have to run its course to the bitter, terrible end. And from their unholy union with the daughters of men, a new race was about to be born, a race of giants whose hunger would devour the world. From the forbidden unions of the Watchers and the women of Earth, a new race was born, a race unlike any the world had ever seen before or would ever see again. The ancient texts give them a name that means the fallen ones, or perhaps, more accurately, those who cause others to fall, the Nephilim. Their arrival in the world was not gentle. They emerged from their mothers' wombs already larger than normal infants, their eyes open and aware, their appetites insatiable from their very first breath. Many of their human mothers perished in childbirth, their mortal frames unable to withstand the birth of such supernatural beings. Those who survived witnessed a terrifying spectacle. While a human child takes years to reach maturity, these hybrid beings grew at an alarming rate, achieving the size of a full-grown man in a matter of months. But they did not stop there. Year after year, their bodies continued to expand in height and in girth, until they towered not only over their human mothers, but even over their celestial Watcher fathers. The oldest texts, attempting to capture their sheer scale, speak of giants reaching heights of 30 cubits, a measure that translates to more than 40 feet tall. Their shadows fell like moving mountains across the terrified villages below. Their physical forms mark them as beings caught between two worlds, a disquieting blend of the divine and the mortal. Some accounts describe them as having 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, a sign of their unnatural origin. Others speak of their skin, a pale and unusual coloration that never tanned in the sun, or of hair in shades that did not exist in the human palate. Most striking were their eyes, which were said to reflect light in the darkness like a predatory animal, and their teeth. Multiple sources mention that the Nephilim possessed a double row of teeth, a feature perfectly designed for tearing through flesh with a terrifying efficiency. But more unsettling than their appearance was their fundamental nature. The Nephilim were a walking contradiction. They embodied the worst qualities of both their lineages. They had the power, the knowledge, and the pride of their Watcher fathers, but without any of their original purity. And they had the passions, the desires, and the appetites of their human mothers, but without any of their capacity for empathy or self-restraint. They were, in essence, creatures of pure, unbridled appetite, forever hungry for food, for experiences, and for absolute dominance. Their diet quickly became the source of a global terror. At first, they consumed only plants, but their hunger was so great that they would eat entire fields in a single meal, stripping the land bare. When the fields were gone, they turned to the animal kingdom, hunting the largest and most powerful beasts into extinction in many regions of the world. And when the animals proved insufficient, they turned, without hesitation, upon humanity. The Book of Giants describes them devouring people alive, drinking blood from great bowls, and in the final, desperate stages of their hunger, even consuming one another when all other food grew scarce. What had once been a flourishing garden world was slowly being transformed into a barren wasteland, consumed by the ceaseless hunger of its new masters. It would be a mistake, however, to think of them as simple, mindless brutes. For all their savagery, the Nephilim possessed a remarkable, and perhaps even more dangerous, intelligence. They quickly learned all the forbidden secrets their fathers had taught, and in many cases, they expanded upon this stolen knowledge, developing new arts and technologies previously unknown. With their supernatural strength, they became master builders, erecting massive structures, colossal palaces, temples to their own might, and strange monuments using architectural techniques that would be lost forever after the flood. They were not just destroyers, but creators of a dark and twisted civilization. They composed their own songs and epic poems, created systems of writing to record their conquests, and studied the movements of the stars with a keen and hungry interest. This combination of savage strength and keen intellect made them natural rulers. They established themselves as the first kings and gods of the earth, ruling over human communities with a mixture of dark charisma and absolute terror. Under their reign, human civilization achieved new heights of technological wonder, but it completely lost its moral compass, becoming a warped reflection of what it was meant to be. The ancient texts give these beings names, rescuing them from the anonymity of simple monsters and revealing them as individuals with distinct personalities and powers. The most prominent were Oya and Haya, the sons of the Watcher leader, Shemihaza. There was Mahawi, son of the Watcher Barakiel, who possessed the gift of dream interpretation. There was Hobabish, known for his incredible strength even among giants, and others whose names echo through the fragmented texts. Most surprisingly, the Book of Giants includes a figure famous from another, even older tradition, Gilgamesh. The legendary hero of the Mesopotamian epic appears in these texts not as a human king seeking immortality, but as one of the Nephilim himself, a giant of particular might and authority. This strange cultural crossover shows how ancient peoples saw these stories not as separate mythologies, but as different perspectives on the same primordial events. As generations passed, the situation on Earth grew even more complex. The original Nephilim began to produce children of their own, creating a second and third generation of giants. These later generations were typically smaller than their parents, but still far larger than any human, creating a complex and stratified society of giants, a hierarchy of power based on lineage and might. War became constant, as giant-led armies battled for control of territories. Human sacrifice grew common, first as a way to appease the giants themselves, and later as a regular religious practice in their honor. They were, in the end, a cosmic mistake. They were beings who belonged fully to neither heaven nor earth, born from a transgression that had broken the fundamental laws of creation. They existed in a painful, melancholy middle state, powerful yet unfulfilled, mighty yet doomed. It's a complex and somber tale, the kind of story that can linger in the mind as you drift towards sleep. I'm always interested to hear what part of these histories resonates most with you all. Feel free to leave a comment with your own thoughts on these tragic beings. For those of you who find a certain solace in these nightly explorations of forgotten lore, ensure you are subscribed with notifications turned on, as our story is far from over. The world, once a garden, had been transformed into a nightmare realm of giant kings and human slaves. Their very existence was a crime against the order of creation, and the cries of a suffering world were rising up to a heaven that could no longer remain silent. The stage was set for judgment. In the midst of a world drowning in violence and chaos, a world dominated by the monstrous appetites of the giants, there moved a figure of a completely different kind. He commanded no armies. He built no citadels. He possessed no physical might to challenge the Nephilim. His power was of a quieter, and ultimately far more profound, nature. He was a humble human in a world of monsters and fallen angels, and he would become the crucial link between a corrupted earth and a deliberating heaven during creation's darkest hour. His name was Enoch. The book of Genesis offers us just a single, cryptic, and tantalizing glimpse of this extraordinary man. Enoch walked with God. It says, "Then he was no more, because God took him." In that one line lies a story so remarkable that it spawns centuries of legends and mystical traditions. The Book of Giants expands this brief mention, placing Enoch at the very center of the cosmic drama. Born 7 generations from Adam, Enoch lived in the long shadow of the Watcher's rebellion. While other humans worshipped these fallen angels as gods, or fled in terror from their giant offspring, Enoch walked a different path. He maintained his faith in the one true Creator, and in Him alone. He chose a life of righteous behavior, of quiet contemplation, and of careful, patient observation of the world around him. While the world descended into chaos, he cultivated an inner harmony. His wisdom did not come from the forbidden, stolen teachings of the Watchers. It came from a source far more pure. The ancient texts say that Enoch found direct communion with the divine through prayer and meditation, walking alone in wild places, far from the corrupted cities of men. While others gained knowledge through rebellion, Enoch received wisdom through obedience. This communion deepened over the years until something unprecedented occurred. Enoch began to record divine revelations. He became creation's first true scribe, documenting not just earthly events, but the patterns of the cosmos, the hierarchies of the heavens, and the divine judgments that were being prepared. His writings were the antidote to the Watchers' poison. Where their teachings led to violence, Enoch's promoted righteousness. As his understanding deepened, Enoch gained abilities that blurred the line between the human and the divine. He could interpret dreams with perfect, unerring accuracy. His prayers, it was said, reached heaven instantly, without the need for intermediaries. And most remarkably, he developed the ability to travel in spirit form, his consciousness leaving his body to visit distant places on Earth, and even realms beyond the physical world. This unique gift made him invaluable as the hour of judgment approached. He could move between worlds, a skill possessed by neither the earthbound giants nor their fallen fathers. He became the sole, authorized messenger between a rebellious earth and a just heaven. And so it was that the giants, for all their might, came to seek the counsel of a single mortal man. Their sleep had become plagued by terrible, apocalyptic dreams. They saw visions of great tablets of stone descending from heaven, inscribed with judgments. They dreamed of magnificent gardens with thousands of trees being violently uprooted by angels with flaming swords. Though they were masters of the physical world, they were helpless before these visions that foretold their doom. In their mounting dread, they realized they needed someone who could interpret these visions, and perhaps, just perhaps, intercede for them. And so they turned to Enoch. They chose one of their own, a giant named Mahar, the son of the Watcher Barakiel, and sent him on a desperate pilgrimage to find the holy man. Mahawi traveled enormous distances to find Enoch, who lived far from the corrupted regions, in a place of natural beauty that still resembled the original creation. Their meeting was a moment of profound and symbolic power. There stood Mahawi, a being of enormous size and supernatural origin, bending down to address Enoch, a human of ordinary appearance but extraordinary spirit. It was the physical embodiment of the conflict itself. The giant, physically immense but spiritually bankrupt, standing before the man, physically small but spiritually awakened. Mahawi respectfully described the dreams that were tormenting his brothers, and he asked, with a vulnerable questioning that giants were not known for, what these visions meant. Enoch listened, and then, without fear, he spoke with the quiet authority of one who represents a power greater than any physical might. He confirmed their worst fears. Their dreams were true visions of the coming judgment. A great flood was indeed coming to cleanse the earth of their corruption, and there would be no escape, no reprieve, for beings whose very existence was a violation of cosmic law. Enoch's solemn duty extended to the fathers as well as the sons. The fallen Watchers, from their mountain strongholds, also begged him to intercede for them, to carry their petition for mercy to the throne of heaven. And Enoch, in his role as the great intermediary, agreed. He ascended in spirit form to the divine throne room, and there, With honesty and compassion, he presented their case. But the answer came back with terrible finality. Their crimes could not be forgiven. Their sentence was to be eternal binding in darkness deep beneath the earth, there to await the final judgment at the end of time. This righteous man, this humble scribe, was the axis upon which the fate of the world turned. And when his work as a messenger was complete, as the first signs of the coming flood began to appear, his own unique destiny was fulfilled. The Book of Giants expands on the cryptic line in Genesis, describing not a death, but a glorious ascension. Enoch's physical form was transformed into something more celestial, and he was lifted, body and soul, into the heavens, the first human to enter the divine realms without first passing through the door of death. Later traditions would build upon this moment, saying he was transformed into the great angel Metatron, the celestial scribe of heaven. In a story otherwise filled with darkness, rebellion, and destruction, Enoch stands as a testament to another possibility. While fallen angels and their monstrous offspring faced annihilation, his story suggests that a human who walks righteously might transcend all limitations and be welcomed not as a rebel, but as a beloved child, into the very heart of the divine. Our search for the giants has led us through the dusty newspaper archives and whispered legends of America. We have seen how a history, written in bone, was seemingly erased by a national institution. But if such a suppression campaign were real, was it merely a national phenomenon? Or was it part of a far older and far more powerful global policy of concealment? To explore that question, we must leave the new world behind and travel to the very heart of the old. We must go to Rome, and more specifically, to a state within a state, a place of immense power and impenetrable secrecy, the Vatican. Within the ancient walls of Vatican City lies an institution whose very name conjures images of forbidden knowledge and hidden history, the Vatican Apostolic Archive. For centuries, it was known to the world as the Vatican Secret Archive. The word secret was not meant in the modern sense of concealment, but from the Latin secretum, meaning personal or private, referring to the Pope's personal records. Yet, the name stuck, and with it, a powerful mystique. This is not a library in any conventional sense, it is a fortress of knowledge. Behind its guarded doors lie 53 miles of shelving, containing documents that span more than 12 centuries of human history. Its official purpose is to house the acts of the Holy See, priceless papal correspondence, and the records of diplomatic exchanges with kings and emperors. It is, by any measure, the single most important historical archive in the Western world. But what if its official purpose is only a fraction of its true function? What if, over the millennia, as the Church extended its influence across the globe, it became not just a collector of documents, but a repository for things that did not fit, artifacts, texts, and even remains that were too dangerous, too contradictory, too paradigm-shattering for the flock to ever see? What if the archive is not just a library of our history, but a prison for another history entirely? Let us, in the quiet of this late hour, take a hypothetical journey down into its climate-controlled vaults, descending level by level, through layers of secrecy, to speculate on what might be hidden there, in the deepest, most inaccessible chambers on Earth. Our first stop is the Library of the Damned, the collection of forbidden books. We know that the Bible, as we have it today, is the result of centuries of debate and selection. The early church fathers and later councils, like the Council of Trent, made definitive choices about which books were divinely inspired and which were not. Those that were excluded are known as the Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha. We have copies of many of these texts, but they are often fragmented, incomplete, or are copies of copies translated across multiple languages. But what if the Vatican, with its unparalleled resources for collection and preservation over 2,000 years, possesses the originals? Imagine a shelf, deep in the archives, containing a scroll that has not seen the light of day since the 1st century. It is the Book of Giants, but not the scattered fragments we have painstakingly pieced together from the caves of the Dead Sea and the sands of Central Asia. It is the complete, unabridged text. In its pages are not just hints, but detailed chronicles of the Nephilim society. It lists the names of all 200 watchers who descended, not just the few we know. It describes their technology, their art, their systems of governance, and the full, horrifying extent of their corruption of the natural world. It contains the full dialogue between Maha and Enoch, a philosophical and theological debate that would reshape our understanding of good and evil. Next to it might lie the complete, original Aramaic Book of Enoch, a text so influential in the early church that it is quoted directly in the New Testament epistle of Jude. The version we have today comes primarily from Ethiopia, but scholars know it is a translation. Does the Vatican hold the source document, containing chapters and revelations deemed too strange for later generations? Passages that describe in even greater detail the hierarchies of heaven, the nature of the watcher's sin, and the specifics of the coming judgment? And what of other texts, like the secret book of John, which presents a Gnostic view of creation where the God of the Old Testament is a flawed, lesser being? The motive for concealing such texts would be clear and, from a certain point of view, entirely logical. The established narrative of Genesis is one of elegant simplicity: creation, the fall of man through Adam and Eve's disobedience, and the promise of redemption. The story told in these forbidden books is far messier. It is a story of divine beings rebelling, of a hybrid race corrupting the entire world, and of a cosmic war that precedes the fall of man. It complicates the nature of sin, suggesting its origins are not entirely human. To protect the clarity and absolute authority of the canonical scriptures, these other, more chaotic stories had to be set aside, studied in secret, and locked away from public view. But our journey does not end with texts. Let us descend deeper, past the 53 miles of shelving, into a chamber where the silence is different, heavier, a place for things not written but that once lived and breathed. This is the hypothetical ossuary of the damned, the secret at the heart of the conspiracy. For the greatest threat to the established narrative is not a contradictory story, which can be dismissed as allegory or myth. The greatest threat is irrefutable, physical proof. Imagine a vast subterranean vault, its air kept at a constant temperature and humidity, and inside, resting in climate-controlled cases or ancient stone sarcophagi, lie the very things the Smithsonian allegedly destroyed: the bones of the giants. Here, one might find a collection of skulls, gathered over centuries by papal agents and Knights Templar from the Holy Lands and beyond. Skulls that are not just larger than a human's, but possess the anomalous features spoken of in the old accounts: the slight, bony protrusions at the forehead, the powerfully pronounced jawbones, and, most chillingly, the undeniable presence of a double row of teeth. In the center of this chamber, perhaps, lies the ultimate proof: a complete articulated skeleton, its bones, the color of ancient ivory, measuring over 10 feet in length, a silent, unassailable testament to the beings described in Genesis, chapter 6. Beside it, a placard written in Latin might detail its discovery, found in a sealed tomb near Hebron, the ancient city of the Anakim, a tribe of biblical giants. Perhaps they even have the most famous giant of all. The Bible gives a detailed description of Goliath of Gath, his height, his armor, his spear. What if, through its long and powerful influence in the Holy Land, the Church located his tomb and, recognizing the immense power and danger of such a relic, secretly transported his remains to the security of the Vatican? To hide a text is to control an idea. To hide a 10-foot skeleton is to control reality itself. Such an object would shatter the carefully constructed wall between sacred myth and scientific history. It would prove that the legends were literal. It would open a Pandora's box of terrifying questions about our origins, about the history of life on this planet, and about the true nature of the beings that humanity has worshipped as gods. The risks of such a revelation would be incalculable. The only way to manage such a reality-bending truth would be to hide it completely. But let us venture to one final, even deeper level of speculation. Beyond the books and the bones, what if there is a vault that contains things that are neither human nor Nephilim, but are artifacts of the Watchers themselves? What would an object from a being who was once a celestial angel even look like? Here, in the deepest and most secret vault, one might find the artifacts of their rebellion and their fall. Perhaps, resting on velvet, is a sword that glows with a faint internal light, a weapon forged by Azazel, with a knowledge of metallurgy not native to this world. Or perhaps there are fragments of what the ancient texts call their robes of light, the celestial garments they supposedly shed before taking on physical form, the fabric of which defies all earthly analysis. What if the forbidden knowledge they taught was not magic, but a form of advanced technology? Could the Vatican be in possession of devices whose function we cannot begin to comprehend? This brings us to a fascinating and persistent legend, that of the chronovisor. The story tells that in the 1950s, a Benedictine monk named Father Pellegrino Ernetti, assisted by a team of top scientists, secretly built a device for the Vatican. This was not a time machine, but a kind of cosmic viewer, able to intercept the residual light and sound waves from the past and display them on a screen. Father Ernetti claimed to have used the chronovisor to witness historical events, including the final hours of Christ. The Vatican, of course, denies the existence of such a device. But if it were real, they would surely have turned its lens back further, to the very beginning. They would have witnessed the Watcher's descent on Mount Hermon. They would have seen the giants stride across the antediluvian world. They would have watched the floodwaters rise. They would have seen for themselves that the myths were true. And having seen, they would have understood more than anyone the absolute necessity of keeping this history a secret. Our journey ends here, at the theoretical bottom of the world's most secret place. We have moved from forbidden books to monstrous bones to angelic technology. The Vatican archives, in this view, become the ultimate repository for all the inconvenient truths of our past. And this leaves us with one final, haunting question. Is the Church a malevolent jailer, hiding the truth to maintain its own power and control? Or is it a reluctant, and perhaps even benevolent guardian, protecting humanity from a knowledge so profound, so reality-shattering, that we are simply not yet ready to comprehend it? The silence from behind the Vatican's ancient walls, much like the silence from our museums, leaves us with only our questions. And in the dead of night, those questions can be the most haunting companions of all. This reinterpretation frames the Anunnaki not as gods, but as the architects of a civilization so ancient, it has been almost entirely forgotten. The concept of these powerful, lost civilizations is a deep and fascinating well of mystery, one that we have explored in many other nights just like this one. For those of you who wish to continue this line of thought, I have compiled these tales into a playlist on the channel page, simply called Lost Civilizations. It is the perfect place to continue your journey after tonight, but for now, let us return to the most personal lost civilization of all, the one encoded within us. The story of our creation may not be written on stone tablets, but in the helical coils of our own DNA. We are, in this view, living artifacts, a hybrid race walking the earth, carrying within us a dormant cosmic legacy. And the conflict between our spiritual aspirations and our baser, more destructive instincts might not be a moral struggle, but the ancient, echoing conflict of our two sets of genes, one from the earth and one from the stars. Our journey into the suppressed history of the giants has taken us from the buried bones of America to the secret vaults of the Vatican. We have seen how a physical history and a textual history may have been systematically hidden. But now, we must ask a more profound question. What if the most compelling evidence for this lost age is not hidden in a vault or buried in the earth at all? What if it is hidden in plain sight, encoded within every human being on this planet? To explore this possibility, we must travel further back in time than any previous chapter, to a civilization that predates the writing of Genesis, to the sun-scorched plains of ancient Mesopotamia. We must look to the clay tablets of Sumer, for it is there that a story is told that is so similar to the tale of the Watchers and the Nephilim. It forces us to reconsider the very definition of words like angel, heaven, and human. Long before the pyramids of Egypt were built, the Sumerian civilization seemed to explode into existence in the Fertile Crescent. They appeared on the world stage suddenly, and with a startlingly complete package of civilization, sophisticated writing, complex mathematics, intricate legal codes, and a knowledge of astronomy so advanced they knew of planets beyond Saturn, a feat that should have been impossible without telescopes. For decades, historians were content to call this a remarkable, but natural, flowering of human ingenuity. But in the mid-20th century, researchers like Zecharia Sitchin proposed a more radical interpretation. They argued that the Sumerians were not inventing this knowledge, but were recording a history that had been given to them by their gods, beings they called the Anunnaki. According to these interpretations of the ancient Sumerian cuneiform tablets, the Anunnaki were not gods in a metaphysical sense. They were flesh and blood beings, explorers and colonists from a 12th planet in our solar system, a planet called Nibiru. This planet, the texts suggest, has a long, elliptical orbit that brings it into our inner solar system only once every 3,600 years. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, the Anunnaki's homeworld of Nibiru was facing an atmospheric crisis. Their solution was to find a rare element, gold, which, when pulverized into a fine powder and dispersed into their upper atmosphere, could shield their planet. And so, they journeyed through the solar system and found their prize here, on Earth. They established their first colony, Eridu, in what is now southern Iraq, and began the arduous task of mining gold, primarily in southeastern Africa. For millennia, the rank-and-file Anunnaki toiled in the mines under the command of their leaders, the half-brothers Enlil and Enki, but eventually, the workers mutinied. They had had enough of the back-breaking labor. The Anunnaki faced a crisis. Their mission on Earth would fail without a labor force. It was here that the chief scientist among them, the brilliant and rebellious Enki, proposed a breathtakingly audacious plan. They would not find new workers. They would create them. The plan, as detailed in texts like the Atrahasis epic, was to perform a feat of genetic engineering. They would take the most advanced hominid already evolving on the planet, a creature we might now call Homo erectus, and they would upgrade it. They would, in the Sumerian words, bind upon it the image of the gods. The procedure was complex. They took the egg of a primitive ape, woman, and fertilized it with the sperm of a young Anunnaki male. This fertilized egg was then implanted into the womb of an Anunnaki goddess, who served as a surrogate mother. After many failed attempts, a successful creation was born. They called him Adapa, or in the Bible, Adam. They had created a new species, a hybrid being, the first Homo sapiens. They called this new creation the Lulu, the primitive worker. We were, in this staggering view, designed as a genetically engineered slave race, created for the sole purpose of mining gold for our extraterrestrial masters. Now, let us pause and hold this story next to the one we have been exploring. In the Book of Enoch, a group of beings, from the heavens, the Watchers, descend to Earth. They engage in a biological act of mixing with the native inhabitants, the daughters of men. This act results in a new, hybrid race, the Nephilim. The parallels are almost perfect. A group of advanced beings from the sky comes to Earth and interbreeds with the local population, creating a new form of life. Could it be that the Watchers of the Hebrew texts and the Anunnaki of the Sumerian tablets are simply different names, from different cultures, for the very same group of visitors? Are we looking at a myth, or a distorted pre-scientific memory of a technological event? If we adopt this technological lens, the language of the ancient texts suddenly shifts into focus. The Hebrew word for angel, malach, does not mean a spiritual being with feathery wings. Its literal meaning is messenger. What if they were not messengers from a spiritual heaven, but messengers from another world? The heavens they descended from, was this a metaphysical paradise, or simply the sky, the cosmos above? And the forbidden knowledge they taught, metallurgy, astronomy, genetics, weaponry, was it divine magic, or was it simply science? A science far beyond what primitive man could have discovered on his own. In this interpretation, the great sin of the Watchers was not spiritual disobedience to God. It was the violation of a cosmic law, a kind of prime directive against interfering with the natural evolution of a developing species. If this interpretation is correct, if we were indeed genetically engineered, then the ultimate proof of this event would not be found in a buried skeleton or a hidden text. It would be found inside every cell of our bodies. Our own DNA would be the living artifact, the ultimate historical record. And ancient astronaut theorists point to a number of profound mysteries in the human genome that, they claim, can only be explained by an act of external genetic intervention. Consider the so-called junk DNA. Scientists have long been baffled by the fact that over 90% of our DNA does not seem to code for anything. It appears to have no function. Is it truly genetic junk, the accumulated debris of millions of years of evolution? Or, as the theorists ask, could it be the dormant, deactivated genetic code of our Anunnaki creators, a vast library of information we have not yet learned how to read? Then there is the mystery of the missing link and the sudden explosion of human brain size. For millions of years, hominid evolution proceeded at a slow, gradual pace. Then, around 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens appeared, with a brain capacity that was inexplicably larger and more complex. Was this a random, lucky mutation, or was it the result of a deliberate, artificial upgrade? Theorists also point to the over 4,000 genetic diseases that plague humanity. They argue that this is an unusually high number for a species that is the product of natural selection. Are these thousands of crippling disorders the unfortunate but predictable side effects of an ancient, imperfect genetic splicing experiment? The Sumerian texts themselves speak of the Anunnaki complaining about the flaws and the short lifespans of their new workers. So, if Homo sapiens were the first, successful, and sanctioned experiment to create a race of workers, where do the giants, the Nephilim, fit into this picture? Here, the theory offers a fascinating new interpretation. Perhaps the Nephilim were a second, unauthorized experiment. After the main creation of humanity was complete, a rogue group of Anunnaki the Watchers decided to bypass the careful laboratory procedures of Enki. They began to engage in direct breeding with their creations. The result of this crude, direct hybridization was the Nephilim. This would explain their instability, their monstrous size, their uncontrollable violence, their flawed and self-destructive nature. They were not the intended product. They were a biological catastrophe, an abomination that threatened to destroy not only the native life on Earth, but the Anunnaki's entire colonial project. Viewed through this lens, the Great Flood takes on a new and terrible meaning. It was not a divine punishment for human sin. It was a calculated, planetary-scale act of cleansing. The Anunnaki leader, Enlil, angered by the chaos and the unauthorized breeding program, decided to wipe the slate clean. The flood was his tool to exterminate not only the flawed human population, but especially the monstrous Nephilim. And Noah, in this version, was not chosen for his piety, but was warned by the scientist Enki, who could not bear to see his unique creation, Homo sapiens, utterly destroyed. The story of angels and giants, of gods and men, may not be a myth at all, but rather a history, a memory of a technological event, distorted through the millennia of telling and retelling. The story of our origins may not be written on stone tablets in a forgotten language, but in the intricate helical coils of our own DNA. We are, in this staggering view, living artifacts, a hybrid race walking the earth, carrying within our very blood a dormant cosmic legacy, and the eternal struggle we feel between our spiritual aspirations and our baser, more destructive instincts might not be a moral battle at all, but the ancient, echoing conflict of our two sets of genes, one, born of the earth, and the other, a gift or a curse from the stars. Our investigation has carried us across continents and through millennia. We have chased the ghosts of giants through dusty archives, secret vaults, and the very code of our own DNA. Now, our journey takes a strange and startling turn. We must leave behind the world of texts and testimonies, of conspiracies and codes, and venture into a realm of pure sensory experience. We must travel to the roof of the world, to the mighty Himalayas, for it is here, deep within the earth, that a theory exists so profound and so unsettling It reframes not only our history, but the very substance of the world beneath our feet. This is a story that begins not with a bang, but with a whisper. A story told by a single, humble crystal of salt. Hold a piece of Himalayan pink salt in your hand, or, if you cannot, simply imagine it. See its delicate, translucent pink hue, like a captured sunset. Observe the intricate veins of white and deep, mineral red that run through it like fine marbling. It feels ancient, solid, a small piece of the primordial earth. We are told its story is a simple one, a geological tale of an ancient sea that dried up millions of years ago, leaving behind its concentrated essence, which was then uplifted by the slow, tectonic collision that formed the great mountains. It is a beautiful story, a story of time and pressure and the patient work of the planet. But what if that story is a convenient fiction? What if the truth is not geological but biological? What if we have been seasoning our food not with the remnants of a dead sea, but with the petrified remains of a dead god? To understand this theory, we must journey to the source, to the Kura salt mine in Pakistan, one of the oldest and largest salt mines on the planet. Our path takes us high into the foothills of the Himalayas, mountains so vast they seem to scrape the heavens themselves, an appropriate setting for a story about beings who were said to have come from the sky. We leave the bright, chaotic world behind and enter the mouth of the mine. We step from the world of the sun into a world of eternal twilight. The air inside is cool and still, and it carries a clean, sharp scent. The taste of ancient minerals is on your lips before you have even touched a thing. The tunnels stretch for miles, a dimly lit labyrinth carved from solid salt, and all around you, the world glows with a soft, ethereal, pink light. It is like stepping into the heart of a colossal, sleeping rose quartz crystal. It is beautiful, it is serene, and it may be a tomb. The conventional story ends there, with the beauty of the minerals. But the proponents of this incredible theory ask us to look again, to see not with the eyes of a geologist, but with the eyes of an anatomist. They ask us to approach the vast, shimmering walls of the mine and to truly observe. Do you see layers of sedimentary rock, or do you see something else? Run your hand over the smooth, cool surface. Look at the patterns, the textures, the colors. Do you see the unmistakable striations of muscle fiber perfectly preserved? Do you see the marbled layers of white, like the adipose tissue that lies beneath the skin? And the deep, blood-red veins that course through the pink, are these deposits of iron oxide? Or are they the fossilized remains of ancient arteries and capillaries, still tracing the paths that once carried a life force of unimaginable scale? In this view, the entire salt range is not a mineral deposit. It is a creature, or rather, a vast graveyard of creatures, beings of such colossal size that a single muscle group forms a cavern, and a single bone might be mistaken for a mountain ridge. These theorists ask us to consider the salt itself. When viewed under a microscope, they say, its crystalline structure bears a disquieting resemblance to the cellular structure of living tissue. They point to the rich and complex mineral profile of the salt, the iron, the magnesium, the potassium, the calcium, and they suggest that this is not the profile of a simple evaporated sea. It is the profile of blood, of flesh, of the very building blocks of a biological organism. The iron that gives the salt its distinctive pink color, in this view, is the iron from the hemoglobin of a creature's ancient blood. If this were true, the sheer scale of such a being is almost beyond human comprehension. The Hura mine alone contains hundreds of miles of tunnels and is estimated to hold billions of tons of salt. If this were the remains of a single creature, it would be a being the size of a mountain range, a true titan, a primordial entity that would make even the 40-foot Nephilim seem like insects by comparison. Perhaps these were not the Nephilim themselves, but their progenitors, the original leviathans of the earth, a class of beings so ancient that they do not even feature in our surviving myths. How could such a thing be possible? How could flesh and blood become a mountain of crystalline salt? The theory requires a cataclysm of a power and nature that we cannot imagine. Imagine the event that ended their age, Perhaps the same great flood that cleansed the world of the Nephilim, or perhaps another, earlier catastrophe. Imagine a sudden, world-altering event that involved not fresh water, but a deluge of hypersaline liquid, or a flash of divine energy so powerful that it simultaneously killed and perfectly preserved these colossal beings. An act of instantaneous petrification on a planetary scale, replacing organic matter with sodium chloride, molecule by molecule, perfectly preserving every vein, every fiber, every cell in a crystalline tomb. This idea, as fantastic as it sounds, echoes through our oldest stories. Myths from all over the world tell of gods, titans, and giants being turned to stone, their bodies becoming mountains and landscapes. The story of Lot's wife in the Old Testament, who was turned into a pillar of salt for looking back at the destruction of Sodom, could be a faint, human-scale memory of this same primordial process. What happened to her in an instant perhaps happened to the titans over the course of days, their massive bodies slowly crystallizing under a sky gone mad. And so, our journey brings us back to where we began, to the small, humble crystal of salt. We have traveled from a simple kitchen seasoning to a vision of a petrified titan. We have descended into the earth and found not a mine, but a mausoleum. The line between the geological and the biological, between a mountain and a body, may be far thinner than we have ever been taught. The next time you see the gentle, warm glow of a pink salt lamp in a quiet room, or the next time you taste these ancient minerals dissolving on your tongue, pause for just a moment. Consider the story this substance might be telling. Are you merely enjoying a piece of the earth? Or are you partaking in the sacred, petrified remains of a fallen titan? A silent, sleeping god, dreaming in the heart of the mountains. The waters of the great flood rose, and the giants, for all their might, fell before them. Their massive bodies, which had terrorized the earth, were broken and unmade, returning to the mud and the silt from which they were wrongfully formed. The Ark of Noah floated safely on the endless waters, a lone vessel of hope on a planet being washed clean. A rainbow eventually broke through the clouds, a promise of a new beginning. The world was silent, purged, and pure, but the story was not over. The flood had been a physical solution to what had become a spiritual problem, and as Noah and his family would soon discover, you cannot drown a ghost. Death, for the Nephilim, was not an end. It was merely a transformation. When their colossal bodies sank beneath the waves and dissolved in the deep, something remained. Something essential, eternal, and angry. Their spirits, untethered from their flesh, lingered on, drifting as invisible entities across the face of the drowned world. These were not ordinary souls. Born of the forbidden union between the celestial and the terrestrial, the Nephilim had always existed outside the natural laws of creation. They had no designated place in the heavens, for they were born of rebellion. They had no natural place on the earth, for their very existence corrupted it. And so, in death, they found they had no place in the afterlife. They were cosmic orphans, belonging nowhere. The ancient book of Enoch speaks of this terrible, unending fate. It says, "From the days of slaughter and death of the giants, from the souls of whose flesh the spirits, having gone forth, shall be destroyers for evil, they shall stand without judgment." Think of the chilling implication of those words. Without judgment. They were not to be punished, and then find peace. They were not to be redeemed. They were simply to remain, trapped in the twilight space between worlds, neither truly alive nor truly dead. This was the fundamental flaw in the Great Cleansing. The flood had been a perfect success in wiping away the physical corruption. The bodies were gone, the monstrous creatures they had created were gone, the cities they had ruled were gone, but their spiritual essence, born of angelic power yet nurtured in earthly corruption, could not be erased by water. And so, in the clean new world, these spirits became the first demons. In this ancient view, the evil that plagues humanity did not begin with a distant, singular figure like Satan. It began as the vengeful, hungry ghosts of the giants God had tried to wash away. And in their new, disembodied form, their core nature remained unchanged. Their insatiable hunger, their boundless pride, and their capacity for incredible violence all persisted. But now, they lacked the physical forms with which to enact their desires. And this eternal frustration, became the engine of their new existence. Imagine their rage. Imagine having once been a being who could stride across a valley in a single step, who could uproot trees like weeds, who was worshipped as a god. And now, to be nothing but an invisible whisper on the wind, a formless consciousness filled with an all-consuming hunger and no mouth with which to eat. They were a nexus of pure, unsatisfied craving. So they sought out new ways to satisfy their old appetites. Lacking bodies of their own, they began to covet the bodies of others. They began to possess, to inhabit, to whisper into the minds of the new race that was inheriting the world, the descendants of Noah. Ancient rabbinical writings suggest that these disembodied spirits are the direct cause of many physical and mental afflictions that seem to have no earthly cause. When a person falls ill with a wasting sickness, perhaps it is the spirit of a damned giant feeding on their life force. When a mind is suddenly filled with thoughts of inexplicable rage, violence, or despair, perhaps it is the ancient, bitter voice of a Nephilim, whispering its own misery into a human soul. Their hatred for humanity, and especially for the descendants of Noah, was absolute. While they drowned in the abyss, this one small family had floated safely above the waters, protected by the very power that had condemned them. While their bodies rotted in the deep, Noah's children were given the blessing to be fruitful and multiply, to repopulate the clean earth. The giant spirits watched this, and their rage curdled into an eternal grudge. They became the saboteurs of the new creation, the unseen adversaries of a world trying to heal. Medieval Jewish mysticism, in texts like the Zohar, elaborates on where these spirits dwell. They are not everywhere, but are drawn to specific kinds of places: desolate ruins, empty houses, lonely crossroads, and the cracks and fissures of the deep earth. They are drawn to liminal spaces, to places of transition and abandonment, for these places mirror their own court between worlds' nature. For the ancients, this provided a powerful explanation for the unsettling feelings that some locations evoke. That palpable sense of dread in the ruins of an old castle, the feeling of being watched in an abandoned home, the sudden, irrational fear that can grip a person at a deserted crossroads at midnight. These were not superstitions. They were the rational conclusion of a world that believed giants' ghosts still moved among them. This is the mythological origin of the haunted place. It is also the origin of protection rituals. The amulets, the prayers, the sacred symbols used by ancient cultures were not just quaint traditions. They were seen as practical, necessary forms of spiritual defense against a very real and ever-present threat. They were the shields and swords needed for an invisible, ongoing war. The giants' final, most terrible act of revenge was simply their refusal to disappear completely. They are the enduring consequence of the Watcher's rebellion, a spiritual stain that even a world-cleansing flood could not fully wash away. So tonight, when you turn off the lights, and the house settles into its nightly rhythm of creaks and groans, listen to the quiet spaces, to the silence between the sounds. If you feel a sudden, inexplicable chill run down your spine, or if a thought enters your mind that is dark and strange, and does not feel like it is your own, remember this story. Remember the hungry ghosts of the Nephilim. The great flood ended their reign, but it did not end their existence. Their bodies are gone, but their hunger remains, and they have had a very, very long time to wait. Our long journey through the shadows of a forgotten history is now drawing to a close. We have walked in a world before the flood, witnessed a rebellion in the heavens, and catalogued the reign of the monstrous Nephilim. We have followed the trail of their buried bones, descended into the secret vaults of the Vatican, and even explored the possibility of their legacy hidden within our own DNA. We have seen how their hungry ghosts may still haunt our world. But one final, and perhaps most terrifying question remains. It is a question whispered in the halls of prophecy, debated on the forums of the internet, and pondered by those who look at the strange and rapid changes in our modern world and feel a sense of deep unease. The question is not, did they exist, but rather, are they coming back? The foundation for this startling idea comes from one of the most powerful prophetic statements in the New Testament. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is asked about the signs of the end of the age. His answer is cryptic and deeply resonant. As it was in the days of Noah, he says, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For centuries, this was interpreted as a moral comparison, a warning that the end times would be marked by widespread corruption and disbelief, just as it was before the flood. But in recent decades, a new and more literal interpretation has taken hold among many students of prophecy. They ask a simple, logical question: what exactly was happening in the days of Noah? It was a time of fallen angels breeding with human women. It was a time of their hybrid offspring, the giant Nephilim, walking the earth. If the end times are to be a direct reflection of Noah's day, then they argue it must also include the return of these very same beings. This theory finds fuel in a curious and often overlooked phrase in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. After stating that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, the text adds a chilling addendum, and also afterward. That small phrase, and also afterward, is seen by many as a prophetic loophole, a divine hint that the flood was not the final end of the giant's story. It suggests either that some survived, or that the conditions that created them could, and would, happen again. But how could such a thing happen in our modern, scientific age? The proponents of this theory suggest that the mechanism for their return will not be the same as it was in the ancient world. The new rebellion will not be one of angels descending from a spiritual heaven. Instead, it will be a rebellion of humanity itself, using our own newfound scientific power to cross the very same boundaries the Watchers once violated. We, in our pride and our ambition, are becoming the new Watchers. Consider the original sin of the Watchers. They taught humanity forbidden arts, and they engaged in the unnatural mixing of species. Now, look at our world today. With the discovery of CRISPR gene editing technology, we have seized the power to edit the very source code of life itself. We can now add, delete, and alter the DNA of any living thing with a precision that was unimaginable just a generation ago. Some researchers see this incredible power as a terrifying echo of the past, believing that we are, with our own hands, recreating the very conditions of genetic chaos that brought about the first judgment. In laboratories around the world, scientists are already creating human-animal chimeras, blending the cells of different species in the hope of growing organs for transplant. It is a noble goal, born of a desire to save lives. But in its methodology, it mirrors the ancient corruption of creation, the mixing of kinds that the old texts warned against. Beyond this, the philosophy of transhumanism explicitly seeks to upgrade humanity, to merge our biology with machines, to overcome the limitations of our bodies, and perhaps even death itself. It is a quest to become more than human. But where is the line between progress and a hubris so profound that it challenges the natural order? The story of the giants is a cautionary tale about the consequences of such ambition. It warns that when you cross certain fundamental boundaries, the result is not a superior being, but a monster. And this brings us to the most direct and conspiratorial aspect of the return theory. What if this is not accidental? What if there is a deliberate effort to resurrect the Nephilim? The theory, popular in many online communities, suggests that the systematic collection of giant remains by institutions like the Smithsonian was not for the purpose of destruction, but for preservation. Not to hide the past, but to secure a genetic blueprint for the future. The goal, in this view, is to extract viable Nephilim DNA from these ancient bones and using modern cloning and genetic engineering to bring them back. The purpose could be to create a new breed of super soldier, or a new, physically dominant ruling class to control the masses. This idea is fueled by the ongoing controversy surrounding the DNA testing of anomalous remains, such as the elongated Paracas skulls. While mainstream science provides conventional explanations for these anomalies, the conspiracy community sees a desperate, ongoing effort to suppress the truth of their non-human origins. There is another, parallel interpretation, one that connects this ancient prophecy to the most modern of mysteries, the UFO phenomenon. The ancient astronaut hypothesis reframes the entire narrative. The Watchers were not fallen angels. They were extraterrestrial scientists. The Nephilim were not demonic hybrids. They were alien, human hybrids. And their return, therefore, will not be a supernatural event, but a physical one. The recent and unprecedented increase in UAP sightings and the slow, reluctant admission by world governments that there are indeed objects in our skies that we cannot identify is seen by this community as the prelude to this grand and prophesied return. The final battle, in this view, is not Armageddon, but an interplanetary conflict. The sons of darkness mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls are not demons, but a hostile alien hybrid race coming to reclaim the world that was once theirs. So, what are we to make of this confluence of ancient prophecy, modern science, and futuristic speculation? The ancient texts we have explored were never just stories about oversized monsters. They were profound ethical and theological meditations on the danger of violating natural and divine boundaries. They were warnings about what happens when beings are blessed with great knowledge, but use it without wisdom. They were cautionary tales about what happens when power serves only appetite, and creation's sacred order is disrupted by those who should be its protectors. Perhaps, then, the prophecy of the giant's return is not meant to be taken so literally. Perhaps the return of the Nephilim is not about 10-foot-tall beings walking the earth once more. Perhaps the prophecy is more subtle, more intimate, and far more terrifying. Perhaps the return is happening right now, not around us, but within us. When we, as a species, wield our godlike scientific powers to alter the code of life without fully understanding the consequences, when our collective appetites consume the planet's resources at a rate that threatens collapse, when our pride convinces us that we can overcome all natural limits without cost, are we not, in that moment, embodying the very spirit of the giants? The final prophecy may not be a warning about what is coming from the skies, but a reflection of what is emerging from our own hearts. The days of Noah may indeed be returning, not because giants will soon walk among us, but because the spirit of the giants, that insatiable hunger for power, that arrogant disregard for natural boundaries, has found a new and permanent home inside of us. And the cleansing waters, this time, may be of our own making. And so, our long night's journey comes to a close. We began with a single, unsettling question. Where did all the bones go? That question has led us down a path that has stretched from the forgotten burial mounds of America, through the forbidden pages of the Book of Giants, past the secret vaults of the Vatican, into the very code of our own DNA, and finally, to the chilling prophecies of our own time. We have pursued the ghosts of the Nephilim through the shadows of a history we were told never happened. And now, at the end of this path, what have we found? We are left not with a simple answer, but with a profound and enduring legacy. The giants, whether you believe them to be beings of flesh and blood or powerful allegories, left something behind that the flood could not wash away. They left us a new vocabulary for thinking about the nature of evil. Before the complexities of modern psychology, their story offered a framework for understanding why a world created by a good God could contain such profound darkness. The Nephilim represented evil with cosmic roots, a disorder woven into the fabric of reality through a primordial rebellion. Their tale acknowledges a truth we still grapple with today, that some destructive patterns seem larger than our individual choices, passed down through the ages like an unwanted, spectral inheritance. They also left us a startlingly relevant perspective on knowledge and technology. The Watchers' gifts of metallurgy, astronomy, and genetics were not inherently evil, but they became destructive when given, without the necessary wisdom to wield them. The story of the giants is perhaps the oldest and most powerful cautionary tale about the dangers of power without restraint, of capability without conscience. It is a timeless warning that some knowledge carries a terrible responsibility, and that some boundaries exist for a very good reason. Most fundamentally, their story forces us to confront the question of what it means to be human. The Nephilim were the ultimate hybrids, tragically caught between the celestial and the terrestrial, belonging fully to neither. In their conflicted nature, we see a reflection of our own. Humanity has always seen itself as existing between the angels and the animals, capable of divine wisdom yet vulnerable to savage appetite. The giants are the embodiment of that tension, a terrifying example of what happens when the balance is lost. Perhaps this is why their memory had to be suppressed. Let us return for a moment to the silence in our museums and the alleged conspiracy to hide the bones. Perhaps the motive was not just to protect a scientific theory. Perhaps it was to protect us from a moment of terrifying self-recognition. To look upon the skull of a 10-foot giant with its double row of teeth would be to look into a dark mirror. It would be to see, in physical form, the monstrous potential that lies dormant within our own hybrid nature, a potential for an arrogance and an appetite so great that it could consume the world. The silence in this view is not a lie, but a fragile shield. The waters of the Great Flood have long since receded. The giants' bones, if they ever existed, have turned to dust or stone beneath the mountains. But the questions their story raised remain as relevant as ever, flowing like an underground river through human consciousness, emerging wherever we confront our own enormous capacity for both creation and destruction. The true legacy of the Nephilim is not a collection of bones or a forbidden text. It is the persistent, haunting question of our own limits. It is the echo of their fall, a constant reminder that we, too, stand at a boundary between worlds, blessed with a creative power we do not fully understand, and tempted by the same pride that preceded their destruction. Thank you for joining me on this long journey through the shadows of history. Until we meet again, may your sleep be peaceful, and may your dreams be filled with the quiet wonder of what might have been. Good night.